So I know everybody's excited to hear what you have to say. So without further ado, I'm going to give you the Zoom.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everyone. And I want to tell you a bit about my experience. Basically, in 2001, my mom showed some really unreasonable signs of anxiety, and to the point where I had to take her face in my hands and say, Mom, it's okay. It was a bill that my dad was mailing, and she was it's not going to make it on time, and really unreasonable behavior for her. And anxiety and short-term memory and task recollection are the top three memory issues. So with Alzheimer's in particular. And so I basically went through this 14-year journey, and definitely had some issues with dealing with the grief and loss, because my dad had dementia at the same time as my mom had Alzheimer's, but my mom was further ahead. So it was really only the last 2 or 3 years for dad. And then mom lived another 4 years. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of go through some tips and information that you will hopefully find helpful. So my company that I created to support family members on the Alzheimer's journey and the dementia journey is Alzheimer's Family Consulting. So I want to create something where I could help people who are on the same journey that I was on, because I didn't really have anyone. There was no real way to find information. There wasn't much in the early 2000s about dementia or Alzheimer's. There were no tools, not as many communities, certainly, as there are now. It was, now going on 20 years ago. We didn't move. So I moved my parents from New Hampshire to Phoenix in 2001. They were able to live in their own little condo out in the West Valley for, it was Westbrook Village out by you, Cheryl. And they were able to live there until 2007, when mom was getting bad enough that dad really couldn't care for her. So I went through it's time for us to move. Well, why should we waste money on rent? So that whole living arrangements transition conversation. I went through, how do you take away the keys to the car? And instead, I prefer to say giving up the keys, because I never took them away from him. I just explained to him that his safety was an issue. And so there's ways to word things. Words are hugely powerful. And I wrote the book, It's Not That Simple, and published it last year in October. So it's its 1-year anniversary coming up. And I wrote it because I wanted to provide you, the family member, a guidebook on how to navigate this journey, for everything from the science behind Alzheimer's and dementia, since Alzheimer's is a type of dementia, but there's 70 different types, to how do you have the living arrangements conversation, to how do you communicate, today's topic, to building your care team, dealing with the emotional roller coaster, visiting your loved one. The holidays are coming up, and how do you celebrate the holidays with someone who has dementia? So, and then finally, the last chapter is when the end is near. So how the story ends, so to speak. So this is my mom, and so I wrote the book as a tribute to her and my dad, because he had cardiovascular dementia, rather. And so he really kind of struggled with memory, and he had a different kind of dementia. She was sweet the entire time, but she was non-vocal from 2008 to 2015. So for 7 years. So she didn't say sentences. We didn't have conversations. It was just very much, I learned how to communicate with my hands and my expressions and my tone of voice. And that is the world that we live in. So, one of the things that we struggle with, and if you guys would put in the chat, whether you have somebody who's that you have right now, who's in a community or has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, If you could put that in the chat, that way I'll have a better idea of how to tailor this conversation. So a lot of times, the reason why I created this presentation is that we struggle as family members with this issue of communicating with someone who looks completely normal and who appears, for all intents and purposes, to be in fine shape until they ask you the same question 3 or 10 times. And that's when you realize we're in trouble and there's something wrong here. But worse yet, I was doing a presentation last night to a group of family members, and they said, I'm just so frustrated. And that's what happens, right? I had one person in the dementia Q&A group I lead say, I think he's making it up. And I had to step back and say, look, I know, she said, why is he able to be fine one moment and then not fine the next? I think he's faking it. And I said, why would he do that? And this is kind of the pattern of early dementia, their earliest phases, is that they seem cognizant and then there's things that they don't remember. And that's really those amyloid plaques and tau proteins blocking the centers and portions of the brain to prevent them from functioning fully. The definition of dementia is that 2 or more brain functions are no longer working properly. And so that can be tasks, short-term memory, words, any of that type of symptom. And so as loved ones, we get frustrated really frequently because we see this person, they're in and out of cognition potentially. And so instead, you have people who visit them who talk louder, like somehow that's going to make a difference. We use the same words over and over again. Bear in mind that this disease actually has a mechanism by which it stops the access to certain words. So if your loved one says, I need to go to the bathroom, and you say, then go to the toilet, it's down the hall and on the left. Well, first of all, they're probably not going to remember down the hall and on the left. And so they're going to come back and they're going to say, I have to go to the bathroom. And you're going to say it's down the hall and on the left. Again, they're not going to remember that because down the hall and on the left are words that are blocked. And I like to use that word because it's like they can't process them. Now, here's the catch. If you're a family member, you don't know which words they process and which ones they don't. So you're not sure what, depending on the day, whether those come and go. That is the uniqueness of dementia, and specifically of Alzheimer's, is that we're in a position where the disease is so variable by person. It's unique. What would happen to Cheryl's mom wouldn't happen to my mom. I had someone ask me last night, well, is it a given that they'll go non-vocal? And I said, no, my mom, we had, 55 other people in the community, all of them could talk up a storm, but not my mom. So it's unique to your experience. So what I try to do is we walk through those emotions, and because that creates a lot of frustration and sadness and grief and anger and all sorts of confusing and conflicting emotions. And that's why I work with families to help them through that. So, part of this challenge is that you can feel like, I can't believe this is happening to me. And if you feel that way, I totally and completely can empathize with that, because my mom was my best friend. And now, in that situation, before she passed, I had to guess what the situation was. And fortunately, she was in a care community where they were trained and could pick up on her cues once they got to know her better. So I'm just reading some of the chat. Physically fit, yeah. And so we'll talk a bit about this, about physical fitness, because there are symptoms of pseudo dementia. I don't know if you guys know about that. I'm going to kind of go rogue on the slides here for a second. But pseudodementia is the result of an issue with hydration, toxins, so some sort of, whether it's heavy air pollution or chemicals in, or mold or any of those things. So outside influences, a lot of stress, lack of sleep, the usual things that you would expect. And so when we look at those, they can actually change how the brain functions. In particular, hydration is critical. And most men don't drink enough water. Women tend to drink more, but we probably don't drink enough. So everybody stop for a moment, pick up your bottle of water or your glass of water and take a sip. Well done, Cheryl. Because the brain actually shrinks. It gets dehydrated, just like a grape turns into a raisin. And so when those folds happen, we lose access to our ability to actually to process, depending on where those folds are. So I just wanted to do that aside, is that, staying constantly active is wonderful because that keeps the oxygen, keeps the blood oxygenated, so that when it goes to the brain says, hey, we've got oxygen, we can keep our brain cells going. So that's a good thing. What's interesting, though, is that we also need to keep hydrated, get lots of sleep, all of those things as well. So that can get complicated. Oh, very good, Cindy. I see that your dad is over in Inspira. So the struggles that we have are very real, but it's not their fault. And what we have to do is try to adjust and to have patience and to come from a place of caring and loving and compassion. So that means that you have to change your mindset, because when you normally interact with a spouse or a parent, you've had decades of adult to adult communication. One of the most painful things I've heard is when a woman was talking about her husband, and she said, well, I don't know what to do with him. I showed him a photo album and I showed him a book from him when he was a microbiologist. So, he was very smart, and people tend to equate intelligence with capability, and that somehow you've lost your intelligence. I want to reassure you, when thinking about mindset, to remember that person is still in that body. The problem is that there's this gooey, sticky plaque stuff between who they are and who you know them to be and who you expect them to be, frankly. And so unfortunately, they can't get through that plaque, and either you can't get through it either on either side. So because we are the ones that have cognitive capability, it's up to us to change how we interact with them. And so it's that mindset change. So a lot of times we feel this sense of loss, that the memories that we had with this person are gone. They don't remember them. Even the things that you put in their room, we do that for us. I don't know if you realize that, but when we put comfortable things like, oh, this is your favorite blanket, and this is your, for mom, I would bring in little stuffed doggies or something like that. And it was good for her for tactile reasons, but she didn't know that dog from any other, dog or anything else. And so that's, again, we bring those things in order to make it feel homey, but we can't expect them to remember that particular statue or that particular sweater was one that you gave him on a particular holiday, or that it was extra special for some reason, or that you made the scarf yourself. So that loss, while that person's still in front of you physically, is the hardest thing to cope with, because you're sitting there going, but we did this together. We've had children. We've gone on vacation. We've done this. We've done that. And a lot of times we'll use the words, do you remember? And they don't. And by the way, that's a really quick way to get them upset. Because especially at the earliest stages, so early to early mid stage, they'll get very angry with you if you say, do you remember this? Or you tell them, oh, we have a doctor's appointment at 2:00, put your shoes on. And then you come back and they don't have their shoes on. And you say, I've told you 3 times. Well, you're going to get backlash because they're still cognizant enough to know that they have a problem. And it's really scary. The earliest mid stage is where they are scared to death. And they're trying to hide their embarrassment so they don't socialize as much. They won't join you to go do something as they might have in the past. The good news is that by the time they move to mid stage, you can usually, before they get to late stage, you can usually, get them out and do something with them. It's just that that's for your memories, not theirs. And what you're doing at that point in time is what I call creating moments of joy. And that's where it's about you creating happiness for yourself and creating a happy emotion for them because they remember emotions. So all the time that you're with them, you want to be happy and upbeat. And that means that the language that you use has to be, and the tone that you use has to be upbeat. You can't say, I've told you that 3 times, or do you remember, or any of those other phrases that trigger issues with them, as far as that pointing out that they are no longer, for lack of a better word, performing to our expectations, which is why I say you need to manage your expectations. And that means that you need to go in there and just say, hey, it's a new day. Who knows what we're going to run into? I've got a plan to, go at activity time, to do an activity with them. It might be painting a birdhouse, whatever it is. It may just be snack time. And I used to bring my mom Dunkin' Donuts coffee because that was something that we used to do. And I know that she likes it. So I would bring coffee and then we'd have our cupcake and we'd just sit there. We obviously wouldn't talk, but we would observe, or there would be music, or we would watch the people walking around. And so even sometimes when I would say something, it registered with her. I could tell by her reaction, but she couldn't respond. So I always knew when I walked in there that, not to hope for much as far as response went, but I really just wanted to make it happy and make it enjoyable. So we have to step back as family members and realize, wow, okay, so life is very different now. This person that I used to share memories with no longer shares those memories. That's a really hard thing to deal with. And you're reminded, especially if your spouse or your parent is living with you, then you're reminded of that every day. Or if you visit more frequently, honestly, I would visit twice a week. And because she didn't know how often I was visiting or for how long I was visiting. So I would stay for an hour and a half or 2 hours twice a week, because I get that question a lot. How often should I visit? So remember that you want to focus on moments of joy. Now, how do you speak differently? Well, first of all, the thing you cannot do is say, first, put on your shoes, and then we're going to go to the bank, and then we're going to go to the restaurant and get lunch, and then afterwards, we're going to go to the grocery store. If you're lucky, they caught grocery store, or they may have caught at the earliest stages to put on their shoes, but they're not going to remember that whole phrase. And so often I would overhear family members while I was visiting mom give these really long explanations of what they were doing and how they were doing it. And really, they were just talking to themselves. And it was because they didn't know what to do during a visit. And they would say, well, like my brother would call and he would say, I want to talk to mom on the phone. And I said, all right, well, you're going to do all the talking. Let's just remember. And she's going to listen. But you can't talk to her for long because she can't remember any of the things that you're saying. So there's no context. So it is neither a conversation nor something that can last very long. So we have to keep our sentences simple, and we can't ramble on. So everything has to be at best, I would say an either or question, but I actually wouldn't even suggest that. I would say, do you want to wear this sweater? I wouldn't say, do you want to wear the sweater or the jacket? Because and I would not only say that, but I would have the sweater and the jacket in front of me, and I would put her hand on it and have her touch it and say, do you want to wear this sweater? And if she would typically just let go of it if she didn't want something. And then I'd say, let's put on your jacket because it was cold outside. Or I would grab a blanket. So there's things that you have to keep in mind, that the conversation that you're having with them, or the how you're speaking with them, has to be very simplified and give no more than two choices. And if you do, visuals are so much better than speaking, because, and I'll talk a bit about this in a second, about how we learn and how we process information. And so it's important to reinforce in multiple ways what you're trying to communicate. Now, I did have, in a support group I was leading, I asked a woman who had dementia, early stage. So she was able to communicate, but she had no short-term memory. And so, but something had happened earlier in the day and she remembered it. And I said, well, do you have one of these? And her husband was sitting next to her and he answered for her. And I said, wait. I'm asking her the question for a reason. I want her to think. I'm going to give her 20 to 30 seconds to think. And then I'm going to see how she does and maybe help her. Well, do you remember if it was, was it this or was it that? And so one of her challenges was that he was sharp as a tack. And so he would fill in all of her sentences before she even got them out. Well, you're actually creating some damage there because you're not allowing them to even try to communicate. So we have to ratchet back our 120-mile-an-hour lives, where we're multitasking and doing all sorts of things all at once. And our conversations are like this, and we've got our phone and our computer and God knows what other devices, an iPad in front of us. And we're trying to do all of this stuff, and we're talking fast and we're texting, and that world is that hurricane that we bring to them. If we are visiting them in the care community, or if we're just visiting them, wherever they are. But it's too much for us to stop. And one thing that I mentioned at the presentation last night was that they bring a whole new meaning to living in the moment. They literally are in that second. So if you say something or do something, they're not going to remember it. The only thing they remember is the emotion that goes with it. So if you got angry or were frustrated with your job and you went in to visit your loved one and you're angry and say, I can't believe that my boss did this and he's such a jerk. Well, what they're going to remember is how angry and frustrated you were. And the worst possible opportunity would be if they think it's their fault. So leave your world behind when you go to visit or whenever you're talking with them. Just stop. And you know what? It's really good for us to do that. For us, our hearts, our minds, to just stop for a while. That used to be something I never appreciated when I would visit my mom, because I'd be so wrapped up in the emotions. And, was mom's pillow in the right spot for her arm so she wouldn't lean? Did she have her baby doll? Any of those things that, come up in the day-to-day world of living in a community or a group home. And I didn't realize till later that my world's just stopped during those 1.5 to 2 hour visits. And it was good for me to do that and to dedicate time to her and not be looking at my phone. So give them time to respond. And we're not talking 5 seconds, it's 20 to 30. And then you guys probably already know this, but you are not going to win an argument because they are not going to process the information that you're using in order to make this more logical to you. So you can say, I told you that, I told you that, I told you that. It's not going to do you any good, but it will frustrate both of you an incredible amount. So what's the point? You know, and so in the book, I talk about, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? And my next most frequent phrase is let it go. Because we get wrapped up in, well, this isn't right, and that's not right, and those aren't her pants. And the most important thing about your loved one is, are they safe? Are they clean? Are they eating? And are they around other people so that they get to see interactions? So my mom actually lost her ability to swallow. She regained it. She was on hospice 4 times and she came out of it 3. And so she was eating pureed food, and then we started stepping her up a little bit to chunkier foods until she could eat green beans and French fries and that kind of thing. And it was just interesting to watch that evolution, and the foods that they used to like, they don't like anymore, or they may like some of them, but not all of them. And our worlds and how we view things are very, very rigid. You know, this person likes green beans and steak, and that person likes carrots and chicken. Well, that goes out the window. Again, another thing that we have to do to adjust when we communicate. But you love this. Well, not anymore. So we have to remember that they're a whole new person. They are a clean slate. And so that's a really important thing as you're communicating with them to remember. So I imagine, and you guys you go ahead and pop into the text, how many of you get frustrated talking with your loved one, whether it's a spouse or a parent? And Barbara, while you guys are filling in there, Barbara asked, how do you know what stage they're in? So that sounds like your loved one hasn't been diagnosed. But in reality, it's a progressive disease. So if they're able to remember, and I actually document this in the book, it's not that simple, helping families navigate the Alzheimer's journey. It's on Amazon right now. I'm getting ready to release it to other outlets, but that probably won't happen really, really, really soon, like this week. It probably happen next month. And so we start out with early stages, which is short-term memory loss. That's the biggest one. Task processing. So if I knew how to knit, I used to be really quick at it, and I could knock out a scarf during a couple of TV shows. And now I struggle. It could be that I don't remember knit 1, purl 2, you know, whatever that sequence is. That's all I remember from knitting from so many years ago. So sorry if anybody here is a knitter, but so you want to look at how quickly they're retaining information or responding to you. If the brain starts to slow down, that's usually an indication. When you get into motor skills, so like my mom not being able to swallow, and she moved into a wheelchair after using a wheelie walker. Her brain would not tell her legs what to do. And so she would collapse. We would technically call that a fall, but her legs would just give way. It was like her brain's like, what are those things down there? And what are we supposed to do with them? So we wouldn't, she would just collapse. And so those are mid stages to late stages are when they really don't recognize you anymore, or they don't recognize people that they don't see very frequently anymore. They can also go non-vocal. Incontinence is a given. So they can no longer toilet themselves. They can't shower themselves. They, as opposed to say early stages when they're fighting the shower, it's like, I don't need a shower. Well, that's another thing about communicating, is that we have these fixed viewpoints on how often somebody should shower. Twice a week's plenty for them. I mean, unless they're out working in the hot weather, which they probably wouldn't be, then they really don't need to have a shower that often. Twice a week is fine. And if they're fighting the shower, then just, help them with a wet washcloth, clean all the important parts. And for women in particular, if you make the shower a pleasant place, maybe get one of those scent things, plug-in scent things to make it smell nice in there. Change the lighting so it's bright enough, but it's a warm light, not a fluorescent type bright light. Make sure that there's always plenty of light in the bathroom. Get some comfy slippers or some comfy robe, comfy towels, nice thick towels. Make it a luxury spa experience to take a shower. Make it easier on them, and don't fight them on it. So that's a real high level. How do you know it's early, mid, or late stages? There's, in theory, depending on what you read, there's 7 stages, but in all honesty, early, mid, and late is what we usually simplify it to, because the nuances for every person who has Alzheimer's in particular are going to be different enough that you're going to say, was that early or is that mid? How important is it for you to label that? The most important thing is that from diagnosis, according to the Alzheimer's Association, they have an average of 4 to 8 years of living with this disease before they pass. My mom's heart and everything was fine. She lived 8 years after diagnosis. So you have to be ready financially, personally, emotionally, mentally, health-wise. You have to be prepared for an 8-year journey. And so many families get all worked up at a transition point where you have to move your loved one into a care community. And it's something that I highly advise that you do. And the reason why I suggest that is that you aren't trained to be a caregiver of someone with dementia. And even if you got trained, it's a full-time job. So for people who are working, what are you going to do for income? And then on top of that is the number one thing we learned from COVID is how important socialization and stimulation are. And that's why a care community is so important, or a group home, and finding out what those activities are. What are you doing to help somebody in observing how other people act? So one of the things is eating. If I'm just sitting there with my mom and I'm eating, she's not necessarily going to follow what I'm doing. But if she looks around the table and sees everybody else is eating, she's going to go, oh, I guess we're eating now. So that's normal. So, and then the different activities that are stimulating but simple, easy enough for them to perform so they can have success. Those are all things that we're not trained to do and that most of us don't do. Sitting in front of the TV is the worst thing you can possibly do with someone with dementia. So it was good to see that I think it was the husband that was walking around inactive. You just have to be careful because they can be a wander risk and they won't be able to find their way back to you. So another thing when talking and communicating is that you don't want to ignore your loved one. Don't talk over them. So if they're in a wheelchair or they're sitting down and you're talking to another family member, they're still in the room. And I had someone tell a story of taking their mom to get her dental work done. And the dentist only talked to the daughter. He didn't even make eye contact. And so she got really upset, the loved one did. And she said, hello, I'm here. And shame on the doctor, shame on the dentist for doing that. You can talk to 2 people at the same time. You make eye contact, you switch back and forth. So never have a conversation with your family without being at the same level as your loved one is, and including them. You don't have to ask them any questions. You don't have to expect them to join, but you would make eye contact with them just as you would if they did have something to contribute. So with mid to late stage dementia, and particularly with Alzheimer's, you're going to want to be at eye level. So you're looking into their eyes, and then introduce yourself at every visit. So I would always say, "Hi, Mom, it's Pam." And, it worked out well. Now, I had talked about a little bit earlier the many different ways of trying to communicate with them. And I mentioned with the sweater and the jacket that I would put them in front of her. They're looking for visual cues on your face, and they're looking for tactile stimulation. And there's 4 ways that we learn and communicate: visual, auditory, a kinesthetic, which is like if you're writing something down, and then reading and writing. And so for me, I'm a very, if I read something, I will remember it. So I read things out loud if I want to remember them. But visual is more about, well, I see what you mean. So if somebody were to say something, if Cheryl and I were going to have a conversation and she said, I walked down the hall and I saw these beautiful flowers. And as a visual person, I would say, oh my gosh, that's, I see what you mean. Those are just beautiful. Whereas somebody else might say, oh, I hear what you're saying, or are you listening? So they use words that have to do with auditory or oral capability. And then read, write is kind of a combination, and then kinesthetic, let me write you down, let me show you something. And then basically it's the more the merrier that you can involve in order to see what's resonating that day. So if you have somebody with early stages where they can still read, it's important to have them, and write is to have them. So let's say you say, okay, we have a doctor's appointment tomorrow at 2:00. That was the audible. Next is, would you please write that down? And write down doctor. So they write doctor. Tuesday. Okay, so tomorrow's Friday. Friday at 10 a.m. Okay. Now, would you read that back to me? And they'll say, doctor's appointment, 10 a.m. Friday. Why are you making me do this? And it's like, all right, well, we're both doing it because, and that's always really important, is if you ask them to do something for you, they're much more likely to do it than if you tell them what to do. Put on your jacket. Here, I'm putting my shoes on. Why don't you put your shoes on too? See the difference? We get into being extremely bossy with people with dementia. And that woman I mentioned earlier with the photos and the books and him being a microbiologist, she could have, her tone of voice was, well, honey, would you like to look at these photos? Remember these people? This is what, and I said, did you use that tone of voice? And she said, well, yeah. And I said, why? He's not 3 years old. You don't need to be sing-songy. Well, honey, or love, or sweetie. I had a waitress last night that said that to everybody at the table, probably at least 20 times to each of us. So annoying and demeaning and inappropriate. I have a bunch of other adjectives I could use, but we'll stop with those. So they're adults. They deserve dignity and respect. And at any point in time, when you get so frustrated that you can't give them that, walk away. I had a daughter talking to me yesterday who said, Mom keeps saying the same thing over and over again. Oh, I know what it was. She wouldn't use her walker. And I said, I understand, but are you calling it a walker? She said, well, yeah, that's what it is. And I said, my dad used to call it a wagon because it had wheels and it had a basket in the seat cover. And I said, so we called it a wagon, and Mom would use it if it was a wagon. And then he used the wagon. So they had 2 wagons and they would go down the hallway, wagon next to wagon. And she was okay with that. So it's about being creative. Consider this a challenge to your creativity skills to come up with different ways to use different words, different ways of getting them to do things that you need them to do. So it was a safety hazard that she wouldn't use her walker. So I said, call it the wagon. And then the other thing that you can do is to say, Mom, I really need you to bring the wagon because I want to buy some stuff. And I said, I don't care what you buy paper, buy toilet paper, buy Kleenex, whatever it is, but it's got to fit in that wagon because that's what she's bringing the wagon for, is for you to put stuff in that basket. So she's like, well, I just get so frustrated. And I said, I understand. You just have to be creative. You have to think differently. So that's part of what I do with people, is I help them with all those different thought processes, different words to use, different techniques. And I believe Cheryl does that same thing for family members. So again, avoid being frustrated, show, don't tell, because telling makes them resistant. They feel like, okay, you're telling me what to do. I'm an adult. They're still in there. Remember, they're still at the core of them is that person that you know and love. And you have to give that person, that entity, respect and dignity. So when in doubt, act it out. So I used to put my head on my hands when my doctor, when Mom's doctor would say, well, Loretta, you need to lay down. I would do the now I lay me down to sleep thing, where you turn your head and you put your hands underneath like a pillow. And then she would remember that, somewhere in there that triggered a memory of that means lay down. So if they need help, let them try first. Let them try to respond. Let them try to do something. If it's looking catastrophic, you can say, I'm going to try. Can I try that? And as opposed to saying, let me do that for you. All right. That's what you would say to a 3-year-old. So pretty much anything you would say to a child, do not say to your loved one. Because then they can pick up on that. They can pick up on that tone, and it's demeaning. They've lived an entire life. They deserve to be treated as adults. So if it's complicated, you can say, can we try it this way? Or what about that? Or boy, that looks confusing. Can I try? So make it about you, not them. And please understand that they have good days and bad days, just like the rest of us. Unfortunately, their good days and bad days could involve getting upset or sleeping all day right through your visit. So that's just the nature of the beast. And we have to accept that things will vary on each visit. And just a reminder to, let's see. Oh, Tamara said, great question, Debbie. So let me stop for a minute and scroll up here. See what Debbie asked. Appreciating the present moment that we get a chance to love each other again, where he feels remembered, he feels respected and valued. Exactly. The heart connection is so incredibly powerful. And we laugh. Yes. If you can laugh, that's the best thing. Debbie said, my father is a memory care at Inspira. His dementia has been advancing. For my siblings, the conversation is mostly one-sided. Yep. Do you have any suggestions on how to handle a visit from multiple people as a celebration versus one-to-one, so that he stays as comfortable as possible? Okay. So in the book, when I talk about visiting, I say never have more than 2 people at a time visiting. The reason why I say that, and Cheryl, feel free to weigh in, they're overwhelmed. The more people, it's like, look at all these strangers and they're all here and I don't know what they're doing. Or if they have some cognitive ability, they're sitting there going, okay, that guy looks familiar and that woman looks familiar. And I think that's so-and-so. And I think that's so-and-so. When the brain gets puzzled, it gets consumed. And so he or she, well, in your case, your dad, will shut down. The brain gets tired of trying to figure out who are all these people. So he'll shut down. So I would not celebrate. So celebrations are something that we do. And we have celebrations based on our memories or when we're told there's a holiday. So if he's not going to know it's a celebration, he's not going to know that it's Thanksgiving or Christmas or his birthday, but he might like cake. And every person I know with dementia loves sugar. It's so bad for you. But at that stage, as they get older, I'm of the belief, at least, that they can have whatever they want. But that being said, it winds them up just like it does everyone else. And if they have any sugar issues, that's not good for them either, because when they get back to their care community, they're going to have issues. So if you're doing a multiple people, so you shouldn't bring grandchildren and your siblings and everybody show up in a pile of 5 or 6 people. That's overwhelming for the entire community, frankly, because they're like, why are all these strangers walking around? So 2 people is ideal. And then you mentioned one-on-one. Honestly, keeping the tone, that's why I would visit activities or at snack. There's always something going on. And that made more sense to mom that I was there and we were engaged and we had something to do. We would also walk around and sing Christmas carols during Christmas time. She sang off key, but she didn't have the words to anything. So it was probably painful on a lot of other people to hear us, but but we had fun. And that's what it's all about, is what makes him laugh. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Can I just say something?
Yeah,
I know the holiday season is coming up, and so I will get a lot of questions about, how to manage the holidays. And for, several of our residents who are higher functioning, a lot of the families are going to want to bring them to home or gathering.
Okay.
And I completely agree. It's very overwhelming. But for those that definitely want to do that, I always tell them, be prepared that your loved one is probably going to want to leave soon after they get there.
Yeah.
It is overwhelming, and sure that you have somebody that can transport them back to the community, or have a quiet place, a room where you can bring them to and just kind of talk one-on-one calmly.
Yes.
Just helping them to be aware of how overwhelming, like you said, that it could be when you have a lot of different people, and being prepared for that as a way out and not ruining a lot of times people want to bring their loved ones to a wedding, and then it could ruin it for everybody if you have to stop in the middle of the festivities and then take that person out. Or they get overwhelmed and may have somebody.
Well, they might act out too, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
No, and that's not. So for the holidays, you bring up a good point, Cheryl. So, and I do talk about this in the book as I walk through the steps. If you're bringing your loved one home, here's what you need to do. And I might even have a slide in this deck. Let me take a quick look here. Who do you know? See, that was a great lead in, preparing for an outing. So check with the care community. So you check with and find out from Cheryl, what is it they like to eat? What things, like if for apple slices were mentioned in the chat, find something that helps them feel comfortable, helps them feel safe, because that's ultimately where they're going to act out. So then assign someone who can be the full-time companion, because you don't want them sitting there if they've somehow need a change of underwear. You want that person to get on it. You don't want them walking over and being in the middle of a conversation and leaving them alone. So that person, somebody over the age of 18, preferably, that's going to watch over them and stay with them. You can hire a caregiver to do that as well. So they're going to need some help. And if they know and have one person do it, as opposed to, well, Susie's got, first hour and Jane's got the second hour and Bob's got the third hour. That's too confusing. They don't know who to look to. So consistency is really important. And then finding a quiet place. Cheryl, you mentioned this, finding a quiet place for them to sit and watch, and to keep, in a quiet place, meaning that if there's children bouncing around and screaming or yelling and stuff, then or having a great time, just laughing and everybody's talking, get them pulled back a little bit so they can both observe and participate. But if they're in the middle of it, they'll go crazy. They can't, especially if they're in a wheelchair, they can't get her out. And frankly, now they're in a strange house, because even though they may be very familiar with your house in the past, they might not be familiar with it. They may not know where the toilet is. So even if they're ambulatory and they don't know where the toilet is, things could go south really quickly because they're going to keep opening closet doors until they find the toilet room, and they might use a closet door and what's in the closet. So we have to pay attention, and that means you have to manage your expectations. Take them down a notch to 10 and say, it'll be wonderful to have dad here for an hour, and expect that that's the longest it's going to be and plan for that. If you get more, great. Just know that this is a tiring experience for him or her, depending on who you're bringing home. And then prepare your family to say, okay, grandpa's coming or dad's coming. And we all just need to be chill and enjoy the time together and make some happy memories, but realize that, you know, he probably won't be, you know, as long as we would like, but, or as normal, but we're here. Celebrations and any sort of holiday is really about people being together and building their own memories. So he's there to just enjoy the emotions. So everybody needs to be happy. You also need to prepare, if you have any hellion children, as I affectionately call them, the ones that are unruly, it's quite possible that your loved one will say, that kid's a mess, or that kid is totally misbehaving, or potentially, I don't know who you are. And it might be just that day. It might be the overwhelm. We don't know what really triggers those type of things, but bear in mind that anything is possible. So again, keep your expectations checked. Make sure everybody's prepared. We don't know what's going to happen, but he's going to be there. So give him big hugs and tell him you love him a million times and hold his hand while he's sitting there. And, you know, those are the things that he'll keep and that you'll keep too. So evaluate the environment too for safety and access issues. Again, put up a picture of the toilet, of a toilet on the door that has the toilet in it. Do some visuals. If you think he's walking around at all, do some visuals about where stuff is in case he's looking for something. But basically somebody should be with your loved one at all times to monitor what's going on there. So that was a good question. And then basically, I talk about how to greet and leave. I know that this is something that's always hard. I would always give mom a big hug and say, I have to take the dogs out. I'll be back, or I'll see you later. So if any of you, depending on where you're at with functioning and capability and are struggling with greeting or saying goodbye, because sometimes they want to follow you out, I want to go with you. And it's, you know, that's why you have to say, well, I've got to do something. I'm not going home right now. So you stay here, eat dinner. I would always leave just before a meal so that she'd be busy. And so that wouldn't be appropriate for her to leave dinner in order to come with me. So it works out better that way. So let me know if you have any questions there. And then make sure you guys take care of yourselves. I mean, ultimately, they're being taken care of, hopefully by a community or a home where people are educated and certified and understand dementia. You need to get help. You can't do it on your own. It is statistics show dementia caregivers have an increase by 20 to 30% over non-caregivers of the top 5 chronic conditions: cancer, high cholesterol, heart disease, and high blood pressure, obesity, and diabetes. So and your loved one would never want to be the reason why you get sick. And so we need to take good care of ourselves and banish the I've got this behaviors and attitude, and instead say, help. What do I do? Who do I talk with? How do I make this a better experience for all of us? So this is me. If you want to email me and set up a time to talk, I do offer a free 30-minute consult. You can just email me at pam@itsnotthatsimple.com. And I actually just recently changed my website. I knew there was a reason why I was still in PowerPoint instead of slide mode. And the new website where you can do that is Alzheimer's Family Consulting. I figured I'd make the website match the company name. So that's where you would go to get more tips. I have a bunch of information there. And I'm going to move that little Facebook logo down here. And I have a lot of videos, training, videos about the topics, various topics that we cover. Just search for Alzheimer's Family Consulting on YouTube. So let's take a look through the chat, shall we? And see, add your questions there, and let's see if there's anything that we missed. Did you see anything, Cheryl?
No, I think we covered a lot was in the chat, but I was wondering if maybe we could unmute everybody and see what questions, they'd like to ask.
Okay.
I had typed a question. My name is Mary, and I thank you so much for this. You hit so many important points. My husband is completely obstructive resistant to brushing his teeth.
Popular one.
And I don't think he's brushed his teeth in a year. And he went into high anxiety when they had the mobile dentist come, and he saw all the instruments. And so he went into hysterics. And so any ideas?
So what have you tried so far?
Well, they said they gave him some Xanax. They gave him some other calmatives. And I was not there at the time because it was during COVID and I wasn't allowed in.
Right.
But we've tried several times. And then the previous nursing director, Cody, he said that in his opinion, they would have to just completely knock him out in order to be able to, because
that's not good.
He's the one that's very active.
Okay.
Yeah, he's extremely active. He's on the go.
What's his cognitive ability at this point? Like, can you have a conversation with him, or does he just not have short-term memory? How does that work?
Well, he's pretty dysfunctional. I would, on a 1 to 10, he's probably a 6.5. Cheryl, you can add in anything you have to say. He can't dress or shower. He's incontinent.
Okay.
He's also very, and I always say this, he's always in his head, there's a lot of activity going on in his head that doesn't relate at all to what's going on around him. But I would say, as far as brushing teeth, obviously it depends on what stage they're at, but it's helpful to just put the toothbrush in their hand, put the toothpaste on, and then do kind of a hand under hand where you're moving it. Now, sometimes your loved one won't even allow that. And then I think that's why we suggested having the mobile dentistry come in so that they could work on him. And so when that doesn't work, I know there's, it becomes a real issue. And then there's a point where, where when you can't brush his teeth, but what I think the main thing with your loved one is to get him at a good time, at a time when he's happy and he's allowing people to assist him to do it at that point. You can't say every morning at 8 o'clock, we're going to brush your teeth, because that is just not going to work.
Exactly. He was very cooperative when I saw him on Saturday. I cut his hair, really fussed over him. And so I'm thinking I'm going to start bringing a toothbrush and paste and just see, our concern was, is he going to swallow it? Is he going to spit it out? So I'll bring some non-fluoride toothpaste and just see how far I get with it. And
so here's another idea. To me, it sounds like we're telling him what to do, not showing him what to do. So bring 2 toothbrushes and
of course
your teeth and his teeth maybe. The other thing is that to change the shape of the toothbrush. So there's a finger brush that you can, I hate to say it this way, it's what puppies use, right?
Exactly. Right.
So and so if you put that on his finger and you put one on your finger and you do this, and then he may mimic you. So it's all about examples. if there's other residents that brush their teeth, maybe it's something everybody could do as an activity. Where it's like, all right, everybody, we're going to brush our teeth. All right, everybody grab your toothbrush and make, I mean, you could literally make it a bigger deal if you have multiple people that, are higher functioning. But I would go with you bringing your own toothbrush, and you have his cup and his toothbrush, and you have your cup and your toothbrush, and you put a little bit of toothpaste, just like you would, if you were helping someone else who didn't have memory issues. And then you both brush your teeth. And then I would try the finger brush, and you get one for you. And same thing, you're showing what needs to be done, because telling doesn't work. Telling doesn't work. And honestly, I hate dentists. I would be exactly the way, I would behave the exact same way he does, because it's like, oh my God, look at all those sharp pointy things. And now you're going to stick those in my mouth. And on the mobile dentistry knowing that he had anxiety to put all that stuff out there, but you live and you learn. That's something we have to, that's why I say, let it go. It's going to happen. Not everybody is trained to the level and the experience that we have. And so, it's like, okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else. So those would be suggestions.
I like ideas, and I'm going to try different flavored, like orange or spearmint, and have fun with it, because that's what we do best, is we laugh together.
Yes.
And he adores it. And he was super cooperative with me. I think more than he ever has been last week. So
yeah. You said he moved in a year ago?
It'll be 2 years in February.
Okay. All right. So he's had a chance to adjust. So that's not the thing. And it usually, as they decline cognitively, they become easier to work with, but not everybody follows that rule. Sometimes it goes the other way. So yeah, I would try those things. Remember, it's show, don't tell.
Absolutely. And approaches everything, a friendly, light-hearted approach rather than a forceful, we've all learned that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Great idea.
You have to sing the song with him. This is the way we brush our teeth, sort of in the morning.
Sure.
Do it.
You have to be really careful. I mean, I don't know where he's at. I know that the microbiologist would throw the toothbrush and the toothpaste at you for singing to him like a child. So you've got everybody's unique. So depending on where he's at, I would, you can use that, but we just have to be careful, because like, for instance, you doting on him, start off with whatever you did then worked. However you introduced yourself to that day and mood worked well together. So it gives you a chance to mimic that. And then this time say, you remember when we, or not remember, but cut your hair last time. So this time I need to brush my teeth. Will you do it with me? And so it's a different wording than you would typically say, let's brush our teeth. Well, what if he doesn't want to? I don't need to brush my teeth. But if you say, I'm going to brush my teeth, let's do it together, make it an activity together, then that's going to be more positive.
Yes. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any other questions? Oh, a water pick might scare the heck out of them, Tamara.
Oh, he wouldn't do that at home. So
I wouldn't do it at home. So, to each his own about dental and hygiene.
Yeah, and it was all over anyway. It was all over.
Oh, yeah. Whee!
Yeah. We can have a bidding contest outside in the courtyard, maybe. Maybe.
Well, whatever works.
Thank you.
And the important thing is to remember, I mean, you're only going to get this to work once a week, but at least it's a start. And then it might become more familiar to him. He won't look at a toothbrush with apprehension. So what an interesting behavioral thing though, as far as hangups go with dementia and Alzheimer's. Yeah. It could be the case for 6 months and then it could go away, or it could be an issue for a year, but then it goes away and so they pick on something else. So
right.
good luck with that, and email me and let me know how it went.
Thank you. I will.
Yeah, my husband would not brush his teeth before he moved in, and I know they had trouble getting him to brush his teeth. But with the mobile dentistry, the doctor prescribed a sedative. It doesn't knock him out. It just makes him cooperative. And he was extremely uncooperative
That would be
before. I
good
mean,
to know.
I don't know exactly what the sedative is,
Yeah.
but Cheryl would be able to tell you, or Hope
Okay.
would
All
be
right,
able to tell you, because they keep it there for when the dentist comes. And I have them come 4 times a year, and I don't know if the caregivers can get him to brush his teeth or not now. I haven't asked lately. I just know that the dentist comes in and says everything's okay, or he had to have 2 root canals, but those were probably coming on before he moved in.
I can't imagine Rick going through a root canal, my
No.
husband, but I think, the approach that Pam was saying, like get him acquainted and friendly again with just an easy, in his mouth a little bit,
Mhm.
and maybe we can progress from there. But
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
you.
And
In answer to
making
your
sure that
question
you're-
about, Mary, about, what kind of sedative, I think it's very similar, if not the same, as to, what he's, using at various different times when we need to kind
I
of help him.
understand what you got. Yeah.
Yeah.
And remember, you get to brush your teeth too at the same time.
Yes, right.
You're gonna have
We
very
live
clean teeth.
together.
Amy.
Yeah.
Well, I
Right.
think that, Pam, what you said about, about doing it over and over and kind of showing them how to do that and doing it with them is really important. And the consistency is important too, because it's building a habit, and so like she said, if, they see it, they're not going to hesitate to do it if it was a pleasant experience. So, but creating a habit, that's familiar is something that even if they don't remember it, they will remember the feeling that they got, and if somebody was trying to force them to brush their teeth, that feeling will stick with them. But if you did it in a really pleasant way, that feeling's also going to stick with them. And they'd be more willing to do it. So it's a great.
I'll bring you a toothbrush too.
Okay.
Yeah, let's all do
Thank
it.
Okay.
So, any other questions? I put the link to the book in the chat again, because I put it at the very top. And of course we piled on top in chat. So, if you have any questions, again, I'm at pam@itsnotthatsimple.com. Just email me and I will do what I can to help you. And maybe we can set up a time to talk one-on-one. As I said, the first 30 minutes are complimentary. Usually we get through at least one big question in that period of time. So